The bottom line is this: our psychological processes can make us either sick or they can make us thrive. It really just depends what goes on inside our heads, because essentially what we need to understand is all stress is internally generated. Okay. When we look at trauma and study of trauma, again, you've got loads and lots of research that shows you very clearly that two people can go through the exact same experience and one of them will come away traumatized and the other won't. And that is because the stress that is associated with it and how then the trauma is neurologically registered is really an internal, it depends on the internal interpretation of the external event, right? So we need to...
May I ask you about that? That's a really important concept. And what you've just said is that two people with the same experience, same thing, one will have a neutral, or maybe they feel better. The other can be traumatized by it, or they get defensive, or they get angry, or they get sad. And it was the same stimulus to two people. And you're saying that it's what's happened to us in the past, or how we've wired our personalities, that determines that. So if people get that one concept, and if you just be kind of neutral and say, all right, I noticed that when the waiter said this yesterday at the restaurant and I had that reaction, yeah, I shouldn't have reacted that way. So why did I have that reaction? That is the $1 million question that opens up a doorway to start exploring, why am I reacting that way to that particular stimulus? Am I correct?
Yeah, because what you are talking about is that somebody has a symptom, that reaction essentially is a symptom of something. Yeah.
Right.
And
right.
So what we need to do is emotional work. And that's really what the message that I want to send out. We always talk about root causes of chronic illness. We need to start talking about emotional. This is what I've been actually talking about for a long time, but it's about the emotional root cause. So what is exactly behind that reaction? Is it some sort of trauma? Is it some sort of limiting belief? And let's not forget that for most people, this goes as far as birth, as far as the womb. And for many, many people, it goes actually back to even previous generations, because the intergenerational trauma is real. And it leaves an epigenetic imprint on the body. It impacts the gut, it impacts the microbiome, it impacts all those things from the word go. So you can actually be born into this world already slightly compromised from that point of view, and then you go, you pop out the womb. Maybe the birth itself is traumatic. That was what happened to me. And then there is a lot of stress associated with the birth process and the baby coming into the world. Then there may be some issues around bonding, because obviously if there's trauma during birth, then maybe the bonding between the baby and the mother may not be great. And then of course, we enter this very vulnerable time of our lives, which is the first few years of our lives, where we are so neurologically, energetically, emotionally, in every way, we are very, very vulnerable. And it's very, very easy to traumatize a small child. It doesn't take a psychopathic parent or a narcissistic parent. A child, because it's all about the internal representation and interpretation internally of what's going on around us, then what that means is that if this child doesn't think that their needs are being met, that they can be traumatized, and the parent could be doing their absolute best. But if the parent themselves have got, maybe they've got unresolved traumas, maybe they've got limiting beliefs, maybe they've got some sort of weird ways that they think that the baby needs to be like maybe disciplined, or they have some weird ways of bringing the child up that maybe is not in line with satisfying this child's emotional needs. Essentially, it's all about what the child feels inside. And so we would start to talk a little bit about some of the symptoms that people may display, like overreacting to something, yes? But there are many, many more of those symptoms to look out for. So if somebody generally feels defensive, that's definitely one of the symptoms. But there's things like poor self-worth, poor self-esteem, which a lot of people don't feel good enough, don't feel worthy. This is a big, big thing. Negative self-talk, when people have all this kind of the angel devil thing, and that there's a lot of conflict, and then push and pull that goes on inside some people's psyche is a massive stressor to a lot of people. Then there's going to be things like chronic guilt, chronic shame. In fact, chronically experienced emotion of any kind. Well, obviously, if it's happiness and joy, then great. Experience it chronically, that's brilliant. But if it's something like fear, anger, guilt, shame, those things obviously have purpose. Those emotions have purpose. But if we experience them chronically, this is the sign. Chronic anxieties, those sort of things, is definitely a sign.
May I ask here, how can someone evaluate what you're saying without beating themselves up about it?
Oh, beating yourself up. Please do understand that actually beating yourself up is only just going to perpetuate the cycle that you may be in terms of those chronic guilt, shame, and all of those things. So we don't want that. This is obviously something that is unhelpful, and we don't want that. And you need to understand, anybody who's watching this needs to understand that whether it is those things that we describe, maybe you feel overwhelmed, maybe you feel depressed, maybe you feel victimized, apathetic, whatever it may be, those have their root causes, and there is always a reason. You are not crazy. It's not your fault. It's not any of that. There is always going to be a reason why that is the case. And when we were talking about the birthing process and the birth trauma, and then those different, sometimes really micro traumas, they're not necessarily going to be big traumas in childhood, but they will be those little micro traumas. What that does to the nervous system is that it sends your nervous system into overdrive. And that is really the reason why your brain starts to perceive everything as a threat when you've been exposed to a lot of maybe those not even big traumas. Obviously, big traumas are also important to look at. But for most people, it's not necessarily going to be things like abuse or divorce or anything like that. It's going to be those little things where they basically didn't feel safe in their environment, and maybe they didn't get enough kisses and cuddles, and they just basically felt like their emotional needs were not being met. For most people, that's really what we're talking about. We're not talking about big traumas, but that is enough for the small child who is completely dependent on their caregivers to just not feel safe. If mommy and daddy are not showering this child with kisses and cuddles, this for this child may just mean that they don't love them enough to do that, right? And it becomes really overinflated in this child's head, and that's normal. It's a normal process. It's a normal process. But what that does to the nervous system going forward, it sends us into a bit of an overdrive, and then we're starting to feel a little bit kind of on red alert all the time, and everything starts to feel like it is a threat. And essentially, not everything is a threat, right?